The electric universe are electricians. They favor electricity over gravity. In other words, they say that gravity is electricity and has nothing to do, or very little to do, if anything, right, with mass. In other words, they don't like Newton's mass times mass equation. They would rather go with the electric equation that essentially is a copy of Newton's equation. Okay, you have charges instead of masses. And what's the issue there? These electric universe people, what they do is they try to explain everything in the universe through electricity. They say everything in the universe is electricity. Well, they almost got that right. It's not electricity, it's magnetism. And people say, well, Bill, but you can't have magnetism without electricity, right? Yeah, absolutely. But we have to put it in the right context. There is no electricity flowing from star to star throughout space or from galaxy to galaxy. And that's where we run into trouble. These people want to build a universe in which electricity serves as the mediator between planets and stars. In fact, it's that electricity, according to them, that powers the stars and gives them all these properties like the plasma around the star, etc., right? We're saying it's got nothing to do with electricity. Electricity is local, only local, because again, little atoms, little electrons don't travel through space with or without atoms, but it turns out that there are no atoms out there in space. So even if the electrons had to move from one star to another or a galaxy to another, they wouldn't have the atoms from which to jump from one atom to the other. They would be missing that. But see, what these people do is do electricity without the atoms, and they just have electrons flowing through the space, which is even worse. No such monster. Okay? Now, magnetism, a different story, because magnetism does extend to extreme distances. Why? Because they are threads that are swinging around. For example, around the sun. Sun has a magnetic field that extends way out there beyond the Oort cloud. Okay, so the issue is that magnetism, yes. Electricity, no. Electricity is confined to the star, to what's happening in the sun. That electricity generates these threads that extend very far from the sun. Okay, that's what we're saying. That's why it's a magnetic universe, not an electric universe. But it doesn't rule out gravity, by the way. Okay, gravity is also important, but it's a different mechanism altogether. And so, what's the problem with all these electric universes? Universirs. They're known as thunderbolters, plasmoids. We have so many names for them. Okay, and the big problem is that they criticize the establishment. They say quantum is wrong, and so is general relativity with all its gravity and bending of space-time and so on. And they're right about that. It's the reasons that they're raising is for rejecting the establishment, which are not rational. And sometimes they invited me over there and say, why don't you join us since you're against the establishment too? Yeah, but I'm not going to join a cuckoo organization just to go against the establishment. I'll do it on my own, you know. I'll worry about this. I'll do my fighting all by myself if necessary. But the issue is that these people have borrowed the quantum atom. What was the quantum atom? We have an electron bead, right, going around the nucleus. That's the atom they're using. And electricity is the flow of beads. In fact, flow of beads originally from atom to atom. These people get rid of the atom, of the nucleus as well, and now they only have all these little beads just flowing through space. And with that, they want to explain, you know, how this universe works. Obviously, they don't have a chance. It has, you know, their religion will die a natural death. It has no chance whatsoever in science. And over the years, we had these gentlemen, and these were probably the most prominent electricians. Maybe I'm leaving a couple out. And there were a lot more than these anyways, but these are some of the names that you will see people vouch for, and they put them up there as idols, and they say, oh, this is my hero, and et cetera, et cetera. And you go all the way to Oliver Heaviside, maybe. He's one of the first ones that comes out with, he was an electrician, and so, they come up with all these theories related to electricity. Nikola Tesla there, okay, he's also famous guy for all these electricians. Walter Russell, some people vouch for him. You have Edward Leedskalnin, and he built a magnetic castle out there in Florida. And he's not exactly part of this group, but he is touted as a hero for lots of these electricians. They say, oh, look at all the stuff that he did. Yeah, the problem with Leedskalnin, he had no idea what he did. In other words, he built something with magnetism or using magnetism in some way, but he never understood what a magnetic field is. He could not explain, how the microworld works. Okay, he doesn't know what a magnetic field is, never did, and neither did any of these fellows. Now at the end there, you'll see Walter Thornnehill and Wallace Thornnehill, and he befriended me on Facebook a long time ago, and we never really talked, never really even sent a message or anything. In fact, he's still in my Facebook page as a friend, even though he died like 2 years ago. And likewise with his buddy, David Talbot, he befriended me, but we've never talked or exchanged ideas or anything. So it's one of those invisible friendships. Anyways, these are the heroes of the electricians. They raise these people as heroes. Some of them even put a fellow like Eric Dollard, and there's a couple more. There's several of these guys. What's the problem with them? Well, here, let's look at Tesla, who is probably the biggest hero of all that group. And Tesla says, if you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of what? Energy, frequency, and vibration. And no, anyone using the word energy is an ignoramus. Okay, you can't use the word energy because energy is a word that should never be used in physics. Energy is a word of mathematics, okay? In fact, let's look it up. Here it is. Here's the definition of energy, okay? Ancient Greek meaning activity. Energy is not a noun. Energy is a verb, activity. In fact, it's defined as the capacity, okay? So it's a dynamic concept, okay? So you can't use the word energy. What is it? It's a quantitative property. A conserved quantity. You get these from either the Wikipedia or the dictionary. Okay, these are the notions that they have. And what are the units of energy? Well, you have the joule, the kilowatt hour, calorie, right? And the one used by the accelerators, electron volts, and giga electron volts, etc. So these are units of measure. Okay, these are values. So you cannot say you're going to transfer energy because you're not transferring a tree or a rock. What you're transferring is a number. And so they have the wrong language. And people like Tesla used to use that kind of language, and that's why he never made any sense. He didn't have any idea what he was talking about. A lot of people say, well, he took all these secrets to his tomb. Well, it's all those people who put more into it than there is there. I mean, if Tesla knew something, he should have published, should have made it public. Otherwise, he dies with his whatever secrets he had, and nobody ever heard of his secrets. Therefore, he had no secrets. Essentially, for all practical purposes, all his ideas were not there. Let alone that he took them to his grave. He had no ideas. He had no idea how this universe was run. But he was a tinkerer. He was a guy who was in the lab working with things and had a knack for saying, hey, I can use this for this, or he learned a lot by just doing electricity. But he never was able to explain. None of his explanations passed the minimum requirements of science. So he was not a scientist. Here you have another fellow that was on the list, Hannes Alfman. And this guy is touted as a hero because he won a Nobel Prize. And so people say, oh, look, Hannes Alfman, And he was a, electrician. He vouched for electricity also, and he was talking about all these filaments, those that you see there at the top, and they're mediated by what? Electricity. This is the notion he had, right? And he says space is filled with a network of currents. Absolutely not. Which transfer energy. What is energy? I thought energy was a number. How do you transfer energy? And momentum. You transfer motion. How do you transfer motion? Over large or very large distances. Again, Hannes had no idea whatsoever what he was talking about. And he got his Nobel for coming up with some explanation about electricity. But again, he had no explanations for how this universe works. Okay, so these are not heroes of science. They're heroes of people who don't know anything about science, usually electricians, and people who think that everything out there is electricity. Okay, and again, they don't know what electricity is because they have this notion that electricity is the flowing of beads from atom to atom. And before you can do that, you have to specify what your atom looks like. You have to make a picture of your atom before you have anything in motion. And the problem that they have is they have this little bead, and you don't know why it doesn't fall to the nucleus or why it doesn't fly away. Until they can explain that, they don't have a model of the atom, let alone of electricity. And these people are talking about, electricity flowing through space when they don't know what electricity is. Okay, so this is the notion that they have, that people like Hannes Alfman, that you have these galaxies and you have these electrons flowing through space. Now you can have atoms and make a case that the electrons are flowing from atom to atom. The problem with this is that space doesn't have atoms. You don't have between galaxies. You can't find gazillions of atoms, like covering all that space between them. That's the first problem. And so what they talk about is about the electrons flowing through space, which again is irrational. To say that electrons are just moving through space without any atoms, it's irrational, totally irrational. Aside from the fact that you would have to have a positive pole over there, using their language, and a negative pole over here, right? So the electrons flowing to the positive pole in one direction, would they flow in the other direction? I mean, from the positive to the negative? And then what is a positive pole in terms of stars? Is a star positive, another star negative? I mean, they have all kinds of problems aside from the fact that they don't know what electricity is. And here you have one fellow, his name again, Walt Thornnehill, and he has this notion, or had this notion, right, that the universe is a bunch of light bulbs, the stars, and they're all connected, by some kind of invisible wire, for lack of a better word, and electricity flows from those wires from star to star, from light bulb to light bulb. That was his notion. Okay, we live in an electric world. All matter is electrical. Stars are simply electric lights strung along what? Invisible cosmic power line. Poor Walt. No, he had no clue whatsoever. But that was his notion. And here he talks a little in more detail. Let me put this over here. It says the electric force connects all matter in our local region of the universe. All matter in the local universe is connected in real time. How can they be connected? How can they be connected if, according to him, electricity is the flow of electron beads in one direction? So all these electron beads are discrete electron beads, every single one of them. One is not connected to the other electron bead. And you have these flow of marbles. How do you connect things with that? How do you pull, for example, with these electron beads, with these marbles? Quantum effects are not spooky, but due to near instantaneous resonant electrical matter interactions. Yeah, I mean, this is just waving of the magic wand. I mean, instantaneous? What do you mean instantaneous? I thought electricity flows. Okay, so you can't have a flow and instantaneous at the same time. They're a contradiction in terms. Instantaneous means, a given location, whereas flow means two or more locations. Electrons exchange energy instantly. Now, they don't exchange energy, and much less instantly, okay? We don't exchange energy because energy is not a physical object that you exchange, okay? With the nucleus and each other in an atom so that the energy sums to zero over each orbit. In other words, each atom is a complex resonant electrical system. All these notions are irrational, and again, it's because he was using Niels Bohr atom, the planetary atom. So he was saying, look, we have this bowling ball and this little bead that goes around it. And electricity is the flow of the electron beads. And as long as you have an irrational model, of the atom, you're gonna end up with an irrational model of electricity. Guess what? Right? Okay, so here you have the theory from the people in the electric universe. Let me put this on there so you can see it. Okay. Says an atom is the basic unit of a chemical element. They're made up of tiny subatomic particles, including protons, neutrons, and electrons. Atoms are surrounded by one or more negative electrons. Again, this is the model they have. They have a planetary model. Electrons are a bit like non-committal partners. They can be easily separated from their host atoms. Again, he's thinking they're a little bead that just flies out. When electrons are emitted, the northern lights are born from these types of currents. So again, they think that currents are electron beads flowing in a given direction. Okay, whether we have atoms or not, I guess they don't mention that. They don't care. They just have these little beads. And with it, they form these filaments. These bursts and sheets are plasma filaments. Okay, you see that on the right. Okay, plasma is the most common of the four fundamental states of matter. Well, if plasma is a state, it's a concept, it's a category. Plasma is not a physical object, and they never learned this in the electric universe. It takes years to convince them that they have wrong language because they think that plasma, electricity, waves, ether in some cases, they think all these are physical objects. They are not. They are abstract concepts. And until these people understand, what they're talking about, until they use the proper language and define their terms, they cannot make their case. They don't understand that. They think that I'm doing word wizardry or word salad. They're saying, Bill, you're bringing semantic issues. Science is 150% semantics. You had better define the terms that you're going to use to present your theory. If you're going to talk about plasma and think of it and present it as a physical object when it ain't an object, well, we have a problem. We have a contradiction right there and then. And these people insist that plasma is a physical object. Why? Because they never define what an object is. And they say, well, now you're getting into grammar, that's for English majors, and we don't want to get in that. We just want to do physics. Yeah, you can't do physics until you tell us what your atom looks like and what plasma really is. And plasma is a dynamic concept. What is plasma? The ionization. There's a process going on. It's not a static thing. You can't take a photograph of plasma because whatever you took a picture of is not plasma. Plasma has to be moving in order for it to be plasma. In other words, there has to be an ionization, a constant ionization of an atom in order for you to have plasma. And they don't understand that. They don't understand that plasma is a process, not a thing. Okay? A running dog is not a dog. Okay? If the dog is running, the object is known as dog. What it's doing is running. And the same thing for a plasma. What the atom is doing is ionizing. Okay? The object is the atom. Okay? Gas in this case. If you ionize it, meaning according to the official version that they use, the electron is pulled away from the atom, then you have this constant pulling of electrons everywhere in the soup. That's a process. That's not a thing. The thing is when you stop all motion and you put all the electrons back to where they were, okay? Then you can say that's a thing, an atom. But as long as the atoms are losing constantly their electrons, that's not a thing, that's a process. And it takes a long time for, some will never get it, but it takes a long time for a plasmoid to understand that. Okay, so here's the definition of plasma, okay? We can get it up there. There he goes. Plasma cosmology. What is plasma? It's the fourth state of matter. Again, if it's a state, it's a category, it's not a thing. But it is referred to as ionized gas. Yeah, ionized is a verb. Okay, in this case, it's an adjective. But I mean, ionized refers to the process of putting an electron in this case, right? So ionized gas is a process. You can't say, so you have to replace the term plasma with the term ionized gas. Ionized gas is not a physical object. Gas is an object, not ionized gas, okay? It takes a long time for these people to understand what I just said. Its atoms are divided into free-floating negative electrons, again, and this electron bead, and a positive ion. So they have these two balls, the little ball, which is the electron, and the big ball, which is the proton. That's what they think an atom looks like. An atom which has lost its electrons, lost its marbles. Plasma in space consists entirely of ions and electrons. Right. And the only way you can get ions and electrons is by a process. Okay, so again, plasma is not a thing, it's a thing in motion, meaning it's a concept, dynamic concept. Vast flows of charged particles. Charged particles. What are they talking about? They're talking about quantities. They're not talking about particles at all. Free-flowing electrons. A charged particle flow. So they have all these little flows, right, of electron beads, right? Or current, right? That's the name of it, right, of charged particle flow. Produces a ring of magnetic fields around itself. So it produces a ring, but they don't know what are those rings? I mean, are we talking about a hula hoop? Well, what are we talking about here? You know, and they just say it does. It is so. So they never identify what those rings are. They say there's these rings every time you have the flow of electron beads. Turns out there are no flow of electron beads and there are no rings. What you have is the threads of the ropes and of the atoms that are twirling around, right? In a spiraling manner all along the wire, because a wire is made out of iron atoms. We'll just go with the iron ones, and all these iron atoms are merged. Okay, so they form these long strips of merged atoms and molecules, essentially a long strip. And it twirls in situ, spiraling, right? And while it does so, it swings around all the threads, and those threads swinging around at 90 degrees to the flow of electricity, the direction of electricity, those threads form the so-called magnetic field. You can't do electricity without atoms. They don't understand this. They think they can do electricity without atoms, with little beads that just flow. Okay, and they have this notion that of the Christmas tree. Current flows into stars and power them like light bulbs. This is the notion they have. They think it's like a Christmas tree, although lights connected by some kind of wire, right? Charged particles move around and throughout plasma. Rings of magnetic fields can form around the electric current. This is called a plasma filament. So they have these filaments that they construct with these electron beads, right? Interconnected and perfectly woven, these filaments stretch across billions and billions of light years. Current flows through plasma filaments. So they think all these filaments that you see there, going from star to star, from galaxy to galaxy, are the flow of electron beads. That's what they say those filaments are. And the question is whether you can produce gravity with that. And they say, yes, you can, because positive attracts negative. See how easy it was? Whatever that positive is and whatever negative is. What's the problem with this? Well, the problem with this, one of the problems at least, is there are the vacuum levels in space. These are the general notions that we have of pressure or vacuum out there. On the moon, you have 10 to minus 8 to 10 to the minus 12 torr. Typically 10 to minus 11. In fact, NASA measured it at 2 times 10 to the minus 12 torr, okay? And in that region, you have approximately 200,000 particles per centimeter cube. Now, whether these numbers are ground in stone, probably not, but you get the picture. There are very few particles in 1 centimeter cube of vacuum, you know, if you have 10 to the minus 12 torr. Okay, so you have very few particles relative to Earth. On Earth here you have 10 to the 19th in comparison. Here you have 10 to the minus 12. Okay, so you're talking about high vacuum, meaning there are very few particles per meter or centimeter cube. There you have interplanetary pressure, anywhere from 10 to the 6 to 10 to the 17 torr. That's minus, by the way. Interstellar, 10 to minus 16, 10 to 19 torr, minus 19 torr, and intergalactic pressure at 10 to the minus 25 torr. And so there are very few particles out there in space. Okay. Now the one on the moon we can more or less vouch for, you know, because we have measured those. But the others are all calculated. You know, they don't have an exact value for what's out there in space. But the ones on the moon, it gives you an idea how much the solar wind, how many particles they have. And they have very few particles per centimeter cube because, again, the solar wind is like 10 to the minus 12 torr. And so what's my argument? My argument, and I worked with vacuum for many years, you can't produce electricity in a vacuum. Let me repeat that because I don't think the people at the Electric Universe are listening. You cannot, right, produce electricity in a vacuum. You need atoms. You don't have atoms, you don't have electricity. What do? In the industry, in the semiconductor industry, you pump down a chamber. We used to pump it down to the minus 7 torr range. So we evacuated the chamber, left relatively few particles in there compared to room particles, right? And then immediately we have to fill it with, we usually filled it with argon, and we ionize the argon. And we use the argon as bullets, because now you can do something in there. You have electricity in there. If you don't put argon in there, and you only have minus 7 torr range, you have no electricity. You can't send electricity from, the cathode to the anode. You can't send electrons. You can't do anything. So far you have vacuum. And out there in space, when you have 10 to the minus 12, higher vacuum than what I work with, minus 12, maybe minus 16, or intergalactic, there are no particles per centimeter cube. There's nothing out there. And these people don't understand it. So they're talking about electricity flowing from one galaxy to another star, to a planet, etc. There is no electricity out there in space. No electricity, okay? Because electricity requires atoms, and in order for there to be electricity between two stars, the whole path between the two stars has to be full of atoms. And that ain't the case. There are no atoms between any two stars. There's very few of them. And not enough to create electric flow. And so these people are out of their rocker when they talk about electricity flowing from star to star, let alone from galaxy to galaxy. So all those filaments that they see there, they say, oh, that's electricity flowing. Electron beads flowing from one star to another, galaxy to another. Absolutely not. No way. No way, no possibility. They need to study a minimum of what vacuum is. And once they realize that in a vacuum chamber, pumped down to the minus 7, you can't produce electricity, well then their whole theory goes down the drain. Okay? Because out there you have more than minus 7 torr, you have minus 12 torr. Minus 11 on the moon, solar wind is around minus 12, even lower, and that's how it's been measured. But certainly it doesn't go above -7, maybe -6 at the most. But you can't produce electricity at -6 either. So there can't be any electricity between stars. Impossible, because there's no matter out there to convey the electricity. Okay? I don't know how else to explain it to these people. Okay, and so what are some of these electric universes come up with? Well, here's Sainsbury. He's the guy who came up with the notion that gravity is electricity. And how does he do it? Well, he says negative attracts positive. And so he goes through this rigmarole where he says, well, all the electron beads pile up on one side of the planet and on the other side of the star, and that's how the star attracts a planet like the Earth. Okay, so this was the general notion. I'm not going to go through all the little details of Sainsbury's theory because I think it's bunk. Okay, and here you have another version that he had. Again, it shows that a planet like the Earth has all these positive charges, right, at the surface. And again, he's talking about math. He's not talking about physics. And he says the sun has all these negative ones at its surface. And because of that, positive attracts negative. And now you have, this force that attracts them. What is he talking about? Is he talking about physics? He's talking about math. And he's got his math wrong because, again, it's waving, hand waving. He's just saying that it is so, okay? And that there's this electrical force that is really representing gravity, okay? So what can I say? These people are not even close. The electric universe is total nonsense, poppycock. None of it survives, none of it. Partly because they have the wrong atom, okay? That's the first one. They're using Bohr's atom. Part of it has to do with the fact that they're trying to do classical physics by relying on quantum physics. In other words, they're relying on the quantum models to do classical physics. And the quantum folk, they say, look, you can't do that because we've already established that you cannot do classical physics with quantum physics. Quantum has special rules in which you have all these magical properties which they push aside, calling them dualities or whatever, and paradoxes, right? And they live with that. And the people in the electricians, they want to do physics, the old-fashioned way, like 19th century way. They said we lost our way. We did lose our way, no doubt about that. But what are they doing? They're using the atom that quantum is feeding into their mouths. And so, yeah, you can't do that. And then the other problem with the electric universe, again, there's vacuum out there in space. There are no atoms, so there is no electricity out there. Electricity is within the sun. Yeah, there is electricity within the sun, but it creates a magnetic field that extends very, very, very far out there. So magnetic field, yeah, is a factor in the universe. Electricity is not. Electricity is local. Okay, and so that's all I can tell you. Okay, again, it's like, you have an electric wire and the electricity flows through the wire. It's local in the sense it's contained within the wire, within the sheath, right? But the magnetic field extends way out there. And if you compare the size of the magnetic field compared to the size of the electricity flowing, magnetic field is much, much, much bigger than the electricity flowing through a wire. Okay? In fact, you can do that with a magnet as well because that also has electricity in there. There's an electrical current in there, but it's the magnetic field which extends way out there. And that does not overrule gravity. Gravity is still a mass-related phenomenon. It has absolutely nothing to do with the magnetism of a sun, of a star like the sun.